There are some cases in which two or more alleles are dominant. An example of this is blood type in humans. So in humans we have alleles A, alleles B, and allele O. So both alleles A and B are codominant, and so O is recessive to both A and B. So we have blood types A, blood types B, blood type AB, or blood type O. And what's the difference between them? So the difference is basically whether they express a protein in the surface of red blood cells. And our bodies goes around and looks and binds to those proteins in order to determine whether this cell is a normal cell or if it has been infected with a virus, so that way our body can actually go and get rid of this cell. There's also another protein that we call Rh factor. So the plus or the minus signifies whether you have that extra protein or not. Alright, so let's continue talking about blood types because it's extremely important for all of us to know our blood type. The reason for that is because if they give you the wrong blood type, they can actually kill you. So if we look at this chart, on the very top where it says type, on the first row, we see that we're talking about an A plus person. So what do we mean by plus? It basically means that if you have the presence of the Rh factor or that extra protein. So if you are A plus, you can donate blood to another A plus person or an AB plus. And you can receive blood from a blood type A person and an O blood type person. Let's look at the next row. So if your blood type is O plus, then that means that you can give blood type to another O plus person, to an A plus person, a B plus person, and an AB. And you can only receive blood from an O blood type person. If your blood type B plus, you can donate blood to another B plus and an AB plus. And you can receive blood from blood types B and blood types O. If you are AB plus, that means you can give blood to another AB plus, and you can receive blood from everyone else. Why is that? Well, the reason for this is because AB plus person, that means that you're expressing every single protein. And so that means that your body, right, is going to recognize every single blood type that they give you. It's not going to initiate an immune response. So in this case, we call the blood type person AB plus a universal recipient. On the other hand, if we look at a blood type O minus, so an O minus person can donate blood to everyone else, but it cannot receive blood from another O person. The reason for that is because a O negative person doesn't express any of the other proteins. And so that means that your body, if you're giving any other blood type that is not O negative, it's going to initiate an immune response and it's going to attack and it's going to try to get rid of all the other blood types. So we call an O negative person a universal donor. So before they do a transfusion, one of the first things that they actually do is that they do an experiment in order to determine what blood type you are. And this is extremely crucial that they actually do this, because if you give the wrong blood type to a person, you will kill it. Alright, so let's continue talking more about genetics. So in this case, we're going to be talking about polygenic trait. So polygenic trait, it's a trait that is caused by multiple genes, multiple alleles. And to be honest with you, most of the traits that we have is actually caused by multiple genes. An example of this is human height. So human height is actually caused by more than one gene. So one of the things that we see in a polygenetic tree, it's that we actually see this continuous variation. But what about if, in addition to multiple alleles or genes, what about the environment? Does the environment play an important role in traits? And the answer to the question is yes. So when you have multiple genes and you also have the contribution on the environment as well, we call that a multifactorial trait. And so one of the things that we see is that we actually see a continuous variation when it comes to human height, because you also have the contribution of the environment as well. So we actually see, if you will, kind of like a bell curve shape when it comes to height. All right, so let's continue talking about multifactorial traits. And if you guys remember, a multifactorial trait is a one that you have the contribution of multiple genes, and you also put the environment into the equation as well. In this particular case, we're going to add a stress into the equation. Different individuals deal with stress differently, and it has to do with your genes, with your genetic material. So in this particular case, we're going to be talking about alleles of the serotonin transporter. So serotonin is basically a chemical that is found in your brain, and the imbalance of serotonin can actually lead to depression. So in this particular graph, one of the things that we see is that if you have two copies of the short allele for the serotonin transporter, and if you experience 4 or more stressful events in your life, you are more likely to become depressed. And depression is a serious problem, not only in the US, but also around the world. One of the best ways that we all can deal with depression is for us to actually be talking to each other. The worst thing that you can do if you are depressed is to isolate yourself. And if you know of someone who is depressed, do not leave him alone. I learned this the hard way, and I wish I could go back in time, but it was too late for someone that I knew. Again, it is extremely important that if you know of someone who is depressed, not to leave them alone. The best way that you can help this person is by talking to him and by providing help, if you will. I mean, there's a lot of clinics out there that are either free of charge or can provide some resources for you that can actually apply for grants, so that way all the costs can be free for you. And if you know anybody that is going through a rough time, that is suffering from depression, please talk to your professor. I'm more than happy to provide you guys with phone numbers of different psychologists, of different psychiatrists, and they can help you with perhaps providing some of the resources. So in the last chapter, we were talking about meiosis. And if you guys remember, the purpose of meiosis is to make gametes, or the egg, or sperm. So those are very specialized cells that have half the number of chromosomes than the parent cells. If we're talking about a human cell, so a normal human cell has 23 pairs of chromosomes, or a total of 46 cells. In the case of the egg or sperm, those are cells that only have 23 chromosomes. However, there are some cases in which, due to meiosis, we make errors and we end up with cells that have too many chromosomes or too little chromosomes, and that's not a good thing. Specifically, during metaphase of meiosis, when the chromosomes align in the middle, and during anaphase, when the meiotic spindle becomes shorter and shorter. So the purpose of the meiotic spindle to become shorter and shorter is to separate the chromosomes, so that way at the end we only have cells that have just the right number of chromosomes. However, there are some cases in which the chromosomes fail to separate, and we end up with cells that have extra chromosomes. So an example of this is aneuploidy, which basically what it means is that we have an abnormal number of chromosomes. An example of this is trisomy 21. So the name trisomy, it tells you that you have 3 chromosomes, and in this case 21, we're talking about an extra copy of chromosome 21. Another name that we use for trisomy 21 is Down syndrome. However, you can also have an extra copy of chromosome 17 and an extra copy of chromosome 18, and that's going to lead to Down syndrome as well. We also know that as the mom gets older and older, when they reach 40 years or older, the chances that they're going to have an offspring with Down syndrome increases as well. So nowadays, you can actually have a test done in order to determine whether the fetus that you have in your belly, if it's going to have Down syndrome or not. So essentially what the doctors do is that they inject a needle into the belly, and what they do, they actually remove some of the liquid that is surrounding the fetus, and they basically submit the samples into a laboratory where they do a very simple test where they do basically karyotype. And if you guys remember, a karyotype is a visual representation of the chromosomes that are found in your body. And one of the things that they're looking at is to see if that is a normal karyotype. Basically, in humans, you're only supposed to see 23 pairs of chromosomes, or a total of 46. But if we were looking at an individual with Down syndrome, what we will see in this particular example is an extra copy of chromosome 21. But like I said, you can also have an extra copy of chromosome 17, a chromosome 18, and that will lead to Down syndrome as well. Thank you so much. So this is the end of the lecture. I hope you are safe at your house, and we'll see you on the next lecture. Bye.